Zarya walked through the grand hall of the alien embassy, her eyes scanning the room full of diplomats and high-ranking officials. She was a young leader from the Ander race, a species known for their strength and wisdom. She had been trained her entire life to rule, to command, and to keep control over every situation. Her people believed that the Ander were the most advanced species in the galaxy. They were powerful, wise, and always in control. Today was an important day. Zarya was here to meet with the humans, a race that had recently made contact with the galactic community. They were a new species, still learning about the universe, but their potential was undeniable. The Ander had agreed to meet with the humans in an attempt to form an alliance. Zarya was skeptical. She had heard the stories about humans, how they were weak, unrefined, and chaotic. She wasn't expecting much from this meeting. The humans had sent their representative, a soldier named Ethan, to the embassy. Zarya had heard about him. He was a member of Earth's military, known for his courage and strength. But Zarya had no time for stories or rumors. She had her own doubts about whether the humans could bring anything of value to the table. As she entered the room, she saw Ethan standing near the center, talking to a few diplomats. She couldn't help but notice how different he looked from the other species in the room. While the aliens around her had sleek, elegant features and were dressed in their finest attire, Ethan wore a simple military uniform, one that looked worn and practical. His short, dark hair was neatly combed, and his eyes were focused, almost as if he was constantly on alert. He didn't seem to notice the attention he was drawing, and that in itself intrigued her. Zarya approached him, her steps confident and purposeful. She had a reputation for being stern and unyielding, but today she was curious to see what the human soldier was really like. When Ethan turned and saw her, he stood up straight, his posture immediately shifting to one of respect. He didn't bow, but there was no arrogance in his stance. He met her gaze calmly. "You must be the Ander leader," he said, his voice steady and even. Zarya raised an eyebrow, surprised by his composure. She was used to others bowing or showing fear when they met her, especially when they saw her species. Imposing figure, but Ethan was different. He didn't seem intimidated at all. "I am Zarya," she replied coolly. "And you are Ethan, the human representative?" "That's right," Ethan said with a small smile.
"Oh.
"It's an honor to meet. You, Zarya?" Zarya nodded but said nothing. Oh. She was still studying him, trying to figure out what made him so calm. Most humans she had met in the past had shown signs of nervousness, especially in the presence of beings from more advanced species. But not Ethan. There was no hesitation in his words, no signs of fear or submission. He simply stood there, looking at her like any other person. "What do you think of the galaxy so far?" she asked, her tone still neutral. She wanted to see how he would respond. Would he speak of Earth's weaknesses or praise his people's potential? Ethan didn't flinch. "I think there's a lot to learn," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But we're here to do our part, to prove that we belong just like everyone else." Zarya's curiosity was piqued. It wasn't the typical response she was expecting. Most species, when meeting with the Ander, spoke of their greatness or their power. But here was a human talking about learning and proving themselves. It was almost as if he was humble, not proud. Zarya didn't know how to react to that. "I see," Zarya said slowly. "And what do you think the humans can offer to the galaxy?" Ethan looked at her for a moment, then answered carefully. "We may not have the strength of the Ander or the knowledge of the Sharians, but we have something else. We have the will to fight, the ability to adapt, and the courage to stand up when no one else will." Zarya felt a strange sensation in her chest. Was it admiration, or maybe something else? She couldn't tell. But there was something in Ethan's words that felt ... different. He wasn't boasting or claiming superiority. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just speaking the truth as he saw it. "Courage," Zarya repeated, almost to herself. "Is that what you believe sets your people apart?" Ethan nodded. "What's gotten us this far?" Zarya studied him, trying to understand what he meant. Humans, she knew, had survived many challenges. They had been through wars, famines, and countless struggles. But they were still here, still fighting. That alone earned them respect in her eyes. "You don't fear the unknown?" Zarya asked. "The galaxy is vast, and the dangers are endless." What? Ethan met her gaze without hesitation. "Fear is natural," he said, "but we don't let it control us. We face it, one step at a time." For the first time in the conversation, Zarya felt a shift in the air. She wasn't sure why, but she was beginning to see Ethan in a new light. There was a quiet strength about him, something that made him different from the others. It was not his appearance, nor his military rank. It was his spirit, his quiet confidence. Before she could say anything else, one of the other diplomats approached them, breaking the moment. Zarya glanced at Ethan, who gave her a polite nod. She found herself watching him as he spoke with the diplomat, but her thoughts were scattered. Something about Ethan had left an impression on her, something she couldn't quite explain. As the meeting continued, Zarya couldn't shake the feeling that this human soldier, Ethan, had just become more than just a representative. He had become a mystery, one she was eager to solve. And for the first time, Zarya found herself wondering if the humans might just be more than she had ever imagined. The days following the first meeting were filled with meetings, discussions, and negotiations. Zarya found herself thinking about Ethan more than she expected. He had made a lasting impression on her during their first conversation. His calmness, his confidence, and his honesty had shaken her beliefs about humans. She couldn't deny it. He was different. She had been trained to view humans as a weak, chaotic species. But now, after meeting Ethan, that image was beginning to crack. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but there was something raw and honest about them. They didn't hide behind their strength or try to make themselves appear greater than they were. Ethan's words about courage and adaptability kept echoing in her mind. They had struck a chord with her in a way she couldn't explain. Zarya couldn't help but notice how different Ethan was from the other humans she had met. While they were eager to please, constantly seeking approval from more powerful species, Ethan didn't seek validation. He didn't feel the need to show off or prove anything. Instead, he simply spoke his truth. That made Zarya wonder what kind of person he truly was. The next day, Zarya decided to seek him out. She knew that the human representatives would be discussing further terms of the alliance, but she had a different purpose in mind. She wanted to learn more about Ethan, the man who had left her so intrigued. She knew the meeting would be long and full of political talk, but she didn't care about that. She had questions, and she needed answers. She found him in the embassy's courtyard, sitting alone on a bench and looking up at the sky. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a golden glow across the landscape. Albeldia approached him quietly. Not wanting to startle him, Ethan turned his head slightly when he heard her footsteps, and a small smile appeared on his face. "Zarya," he said, standing up to greet her. "I wasn't expecting you." Zarya raised an eyebrow. "And why is that?" Ethan chuckled. "Thought you would be busy with all the official meetings." "I was," Zarya replied, her voice calm. "But I wanted to speak with you." Away from all the politics, Ethan nodded, understanding her desire for a more personal conversation. "I'm glad you stopped by. I've been wanting to talk to you too." They both sat down on the bench, and for a few moments, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the embassy's busy halls were distant here, and the quiet was a welcome change. Zarya had to admit she felt at ease next to Ethan, something she had never expected. "Tell me more about humans, Ethan," Zarya said, breaking the silence. "I've met a few of your people, but they all seem ... eager to please. Different. Don't seem to care what others think of you." Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "I guess it's just the way I was raised. Humans are a diverse group, but we value honesty. We value courage, too. Some people might try to impress others or seek approval, but at the end of the day, it's about doing what's right for us and the people we care about." Zarya listened carefully. His words were simple, but there was wisdom in them that she hadn't expected. She had always believed that strength and power were the qualities that made someone valuable. But now, she was beginning to see that perhaps there was more to it than that. "I've always thought humans were weak," Zarya admitted. "That's what my people have taught me. We've never seen you as equals." Ethan looked at her, his expression serious but not offended. "I can see why you'd think that, but you have to understand that every species has its strengths and weaknesses. We might not have the physical strength that some races do, but we have something else. We fight for what's important, and we adapt. We don't give up when things get tough." Zarya's mind raced as she processed his words. She had always been taught that her people were the best, that their strength was unmatched. But here was a human, one of the species she had always looked down on, telling her that strength came in different forms. She had never really considered that before. "Adapt," Zarya repeated quietly. "That's something I don't hear often." Ethan nodded. "But when you're faced with challenges, you either find a way to overcome them, or you don't. Humans don't back down easily. And that's something I've seen in every human I've met, even the ones who seem weak at first." Waya was silent, for a moment, reflecting on his words. She had always prided herself on her own ability to remain strong and unshaken. But now, she was beginning to question whether there was more to strength than she had ever known. "I want to understand," Zarya said, her voice softer than before. "What drives you, Ethan? Why do humans fight so hard?" Ethan looked at her, his eyes thoughtful. "It's because we know that we don't have forever. Our time here is limited, so we make the most of it. We fight for the things we love, for the people who matter to us, and that's what gives us the strength to keep going." Zarya stared at him, her thoughts swirling. She had never met anyone quite like Ethan before. He spoke with such sincerity, and there was a depth to his words that made her see him and humanity in a completely new light. The walls she had built around herself, the ones that kept her safe and in control, began to feel less important in this moment. She wasn't sure why, but she felt vulnerable around him. And for the first time, she didn't mind. "Thank you for sharing that with me," Zarya said, her voice quieter now, I think I'm starting to understand." Ethan smiled. "Gently, I'm glad to hear that." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Zarya realized that this conversation had changed something within her. She had always seen herself as the strongest, the most powerful. But now, she was starting to see that true strength came in many forms. And maybe, just maybe, humans had a strength she had never given them credit for. The days after their conversation in the courtyard seemed to pass in a blur. Zarya couldn't stop thinking about Ethan and the things he had said. There was something about him that was different, something that made her question everything she had been taught about humans. He had a calmness, a quiet strength that she had never seen in anyone before. Even though he was just a soldier, he had an air of dignity and purpose that made him stand out from the others. Zarya found herself looking for excuses to spend more time with him. She would walk through the halls of the embassy and find herself hoping to bump into him, hoping to hear his thoughts on the galaxy or his experiences as a soldier. It was strange. She had never felt this way about anyone before. As the days went by, Zarya realized that she was starting to care about what Ethan thought. She wanted to understand him more, to learn about the man who had shown her a different side of humanity. One afternoon, after a particularly long day of diplomatic talks, Zarya found herself walking alone in the embassy gardens. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the flowers and trees. As she walked, she spotted Ethan sitting on a bench near the edge of the garden, his eyes looking out at the horizon. He appeared lost in thought, his posture relaxed but alert. Zarya hesitated for a moment, unsure if she should interrupt his quiet moment. But something inside her told her that now was the time to speak with him. She walked over to him, her steps steady but soft. "Ethan," she said, her voice calm but carrying a hint of curiosity, "are you enjoying the peace here?" Ethan looked up as she approached and smiled when he saw her. "Zarya," he said, standing up to greet her, "I didn't expect you to be out here. But yes, the peace is nice. It's a good break from all the chaos." "Of the talks," Zarya nodded. "I understand. The negotiations have been exhausting. Sometimes I wonder if we will ever agree on anything." Ethan chuckled softly. "It's tough, but that's the nature of diplomacy, right? Sometimes it takes time. To find common ground, Zarya sat down on the bench next to him. She didn't usually allow herself to relax in front of others, especially not someone like Ethan. But there was something about his presence that made her feel at ease. It was as if in this moment they were simply two people sitting together. Not a powerful alien leader and a human soldier. "I've been thinking," Zarya said, after a pause, "about what you said the other day, about humans and your strength." Ethan turned his head to look at her, his expression serious but kind. "What do you think now?" Zarya took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I think I was wrong. I always believed that strength was about physical power, about the ability to dominate others. But you showed me that strength is more than that. It's about courage, about standing firm even when things are uncertain." Ethan didn't say anything at first. He just watched her, as if waiting for her to continue. When she didn't speak right away, he finally spoke. "Humans have a lot of flaws," he said. "Quietly, we're not perfect. But we do have a way of pushing through, of doing what needs to be done, even when it seems impossible." Zarya nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the ground. "I see that now. See how much you value persistence, how much you value fighting for something important." "Exactly," Ethan said, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. "Humans fight for what they believe in. We fight for the people we care about, for the things we love." Zarya felt something stir in her chest. There was something powerful in his words, something that made her feel a deep respect for him. She had always been taught that strength meant being untouchable, unshakable. But Ethan had shown her that true strength wasn't about being perfect. It was about being willing to stand up, to keep going even when everything seemed against you. "I've spent so much of my life trying to be perfect," Zarya said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought that being strong meant never showing weakness, never allowing anyone to see me falter. But now, I'm not sure that's true." Ethan turned to face her fully now, his gaze gentle. "You don't have to be perfect, Zarya. None of us do. We all have our moments of doubt, our moments when we fall. What matters is how we get back up." Zarya looked at him, her eyes meeting his for the first time in a way that felt different. There was no judgment, no superiority in his gaze, only understanding and kindness. It was as if in this moment they were equals, sharing something deeper than words. "I never thought I could learn anything from a human," Zarya said, her voice quiet but filled with sincerity. "But I've learned a lot from you, Ethan, more than I ever imagined." Ethan smiled, his expression softening. "I'm glad. I think we both have a lot to learn from each other." Zarya felt something shift inside her. It was a small change, but it was significant. She had always believed that the Ander were the greatest of all species, the ones who held the power and wisdom of the galaxy. But now, she saw that there was more to strength and wisdom than she had ever known. There was something about humanities, something about Ethan, that made her realize that power wasn't about dominance. It was about the strength to keep going, the courage to face the unknown, and the willingness to stand by those you cared about as the sun set behind them. Painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Zarya felt a bond forming between them. It was small, but it was real. A bond built on respect, on shared experiences, and on the recognition that strength came in many different forms. And as she sat there next to Ethan, she couldn't help but wonder where this unexpected connection would take them. The tension in the air was thick as Zarya stood before the council. Listening to the endless debate about the alliance between the Ander and the humans, it had been a week since she had last spoken with Ethan, and her thoughts were still tangled in their conversations. Something about him continued to occupy her mind. She couldn't help but wonder what he was up to. Despite the growing friendship between them, there was still much to be done. The council had decided that the Ander and the humans would work together on a mission to retrieve valuable data from an enemy faction that had been sabotaging trade routes. The mission would be dangerous, but Zarya knew it was necessary. The Ander could not afford to let these enemies continue their attacks, and the humans were more than willing to help. As the council meeting continued, Zarya found herself distracted. Her thoughts drifted back to the quiet moments she had shared. With Ethan in the gardens, she had learned so much from him, more than she had expected. He was everything she had been taught to overlook in a species. Humans were supposed to be chaotic, weak, and unreliable. Yet here was a human soldier who showed courage, honor, and an unwavering dedication to his people. Suddenly, Zaria's attention snapped back to the council room when the speaker turned toward her. Zaria, as the leader of the Ander delegation, you will be accompanying the humans on this mission. It is important that we work together to secure the data and bring an end to this threat. Zaria stood up, her heart pounding slightly in her chest. The mission was high risk, but she had no choice. As the leader of her people, she had to show her strength, even if it meant facing danger alongside the humans. I understand, Zaria said, her voice steady. I will lead the mission. With the decision made, the council ended, and Zaria was given her orders. She had little time to prepare before she had to leave, but she made her way to the designated landing bay where the human ship awaited. It was smaller than the Ander vessels she was used to, but it was sleek and efficient, designed for speed and precision. Zaria's eyes scanned the ship's exterior as she approached. She felt a strange sense of excitement building inside her. She was met by Ethan as she boarded the ship. He was standing near the entrance, checking over some equipment. When he saw her, he straightened up and gave her a nod. Ready for this? He asked with a small grin. Zaria returned his smile, though it was tinged with uncertainty. Always ready, she replied, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. The ship's engines hummed to life, and they were off. The mission was simple: retrieve the data, eliminate the threat, and return. But Zaria couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She didn't know what it was, but her instincts were telling her to be cautious. As they approached the enemy base, the ship's sensors began to pick up signs of movement. Ethan, as calm as ever, quickly adjusted the ship's course, steering them into a safe position. Tension on board was palpable, but Ethan's steady hand on the controls gave Zaria a sense of reassurance. He had faced dangerous situations before. She had no doubt he would handle this one with the same quiet confidence. Zaria, we're going to need to move quickly once we land, Ethan said, his voice low but firm. The enemy won't give us a lot of time once they realize we're here. Zaria nodded, her mind racing. She had been trained for missions like this: stealth, strategy, and precision. But now, with Ethan by her side, she realized how much she had come to value his presence. He was more than just a soldier. He was someone she could rely on, someone who knew how to get things done in the heat of battle. When the ship touched down on the enemy soil, Zaria felt a rush of adrenaline. She and Ethan were the first to exit the ship, their boots hitting the ground in unison. The enemy base loomed ahead, a massive structure that looked as intimidating as it was secure. The two of them moved quickly, their steps silent as they approached the entrance. Zaria's heart pounded in her chest, but she focused on the task at hand. She had led her people into many battles, but this one felt different. The presence of Ethan at her side made her feel less alone, as if they were in this together, no matter what came next. Stay close, Ethan whispered as they crouched down behind a large metal crate. We don't want to give ourselves away. Zaria gave him a sharp nod. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the mission pressing down on her. Every step had to be precise. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. As they inched closer to the main entrance, Zaria couldn't help but notice the way Ethan moved, quiet, calculated, and always aware of his surroundings. They reached the entrance undetected, and with a few quick movements, Ethan disabled the security system. Zaria didn't ask how he did it. She knew better than to question his methods. They slipped inside, the darkness of the facility surrounding them as they made their way through the narrow hallways. The data they needed was located in a central command room, guarded by a handful of enemy soldiers. Zaria could hear their voices echoing off the walls, but she and Ethan stayed hidden, waiting for the right moment to strike. Finally, they reached the door to the command room. Zaria's heart raced as they prepared for the final phase of the mission. Ethan looked at her, his eyes calm but filled with determination. We do this together, he said quietly. Zaria met his gaze, feeling a wave of trust wash over her. For the first time, she wasn't leading alone. She had someone at her side, someone who had proven that humanity wasn't just a weak, chaotic race. They were capable of incredible things, and she was starting to believe in that. Together, they opened the door. The mission had been going smoothly so far. Zarya and Ethan had navigated through the enemy base with skill and precision. They had taken down guards without a sound, infiltrated the command room, and retrieved the data they came for. But as they were making their way back to the ship, something unexpected happened. The enemy, realizing they had been breached, launched a counterattack. The sound of blaring alarms filled the air, and red lights flashed through the corridors. Zarya's heart skipped a beat. They hadn't anticipated this level of resistance. The plan had been to get in and out quickly. But now it was clear they were going to have to fight their way out. Ethan immediately turned to Zarya, his face serious but calm. "We need to move fast. The ship's not far, but we'll have company." Soon, Zarya nodded, her mind racing. She had been in battles before, but this was different. The enemy knew they were there now, and they weren't going to let them leave without a fight. But there was something in Ethan's eyes, a quiet confidence that steadied her nerves. She had trusted him from the beginning, and now, more than ever, she knew she had to rely on him. Together. They moved quickly down the hallway, their footsteps echoing off the walls. Zarya felt the weight of the data chip she held tightly in her hand. This mission had been too important to fail, and she wasn't going to let anything stop them. As they turned a corner, a group of enemy soldiers appeared ahead. They were armed and ready, and they didn't hesitate to open fire. Zarya instinctively raised her weapon, taking cover behind a nearby wall. She could hear the shots hitting the metal around them, the sound sharp and loud. "Ethan," Zarya called out, her voice tense. "We need to get to the ship now." Ethan didn't hesitate. Without a word, he threw himself into action, sprinting toward the soldiers while firing back. Zarya followed close behind, her pulse pounding in her ears. The enemy soldiers were quick, but Ethan's movements were faster. He took them down, one by one, working with precision and confidence. Zarya's eyes never left Ethan as he fought. He moved with the kind of ease that came from experience, his body reacting instinctively to every threat. She could see the strength in him, the courage, and the resolve. It wasn't just physical. There was something deeper in his actions, something that made him different from anyone she had ever known. They pushed forward, the fire from the enemy. Soldiers getting fiercer as they made their way toward the exit. Zarya's heart raced as she kept her focus on the mission. They were so close, but she could feel the tension building with every step. She knew that the harder they fought, the closer they were to the enemy's reinforcements. But Ethan didn't slow down. He kept his pace steady, his focus unwavering. Zarya could see how much he believed in this mission, how much he cared about the success of their mission. She had seen many leaders in her time, but none of them had shown the same quiet leadership that Ethan did. He didn't need to command or demand. His actions spoke louder than any words. The hallway grew darker as they neared the exit. Zarya could hear the sound of more footsteps behind them. The enemy was closing in, and she knew they needed to act fast. She turned to Ethan, who was still leading the way, keeping his eyes sharp and focused. "We're almost there," Ethan said, his voice calm as ever. But just as they reached the door to the landing bay, a loud explosion shook the building. The walls trembled, and the ground beneath them cracked. Zarya stumbled, nearly losing her balance, but she quickly regained her footing. Ethan was already at the door, trying to get it open. His expression didn't change, but there was a look of urgency in his eyes. "We have to go now," Zarya shouted, her voice strained. Ethan nodded and punched in a code, but the door refused to open. The explosion had damaged the lock. More enemy. Soldiers were closing in, their footsteps growing louder. With no time to waste, Ethan turned to Zarya. "We're going to have to fight our way out," he said, his voice resolute. Zarya didn't hesitate. She nodded and pulled out her weapon, ready for whatever came next. Together, they stood back to back, facing the door and the growing threat. Zarya could feel the weight of her weapon, but it wasn't the only thing weighing on her. It was the thought of failure that made her anxious. It had come so far, And now, they couldn't let this mission fail. As the door finally opened with a loud clang, they were met with a group of enemy soldiers blocking their path. The air was thick with tension, and Zarya's heart pounded in her chest. This was it. There was no turning back now. But just as the enemy soldiers raised their weapons, Ethan moved. His actions were a blur of speed and precision. He took down 2 soldiers before Zarya could even react. His movements were quick, efficient, and effective. Zarya fired her weapon, hitting another soldier squarely in the chest. It was chaos. But they kept fighting, pushing forward with everything they had. Zarya's mind was clear, her instincts sharp, as she worked with Ethan to clear the path. Bond they had formed was more than just a partnership. It was a trust. It's an unspoken understanding that they had each other's backs, no matter what. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the ship. Ethan was the first to climb aboard, pulling Zarya up after him. As the hatch closed behind them, they both collapsed into their seats, breathing heavily but alive. The mission had been more dangerous than either of them had expected, but they had succeeded. They had made it out with the data, and they had survived the battle. Zarya looked at Ethan, her mind racing with thoughts of what had just happened. She had never expected a human to fight so fiercely, so selflessly. But now, she saw him for who he truly was, not just a soldier, but someone who embodied the courage and strength she had always admired. "We did it," she said, her voice quieter now, but filled with something new - respect. Ethan turned to her, his expression softening. "We did," he agreed, together. The mission had ended, but Zarya's mind was still racing. They had completed their objective, retrieved the data, and made it out alive. But as the human ship made its way back to their base, Zarya couldn't shake the feeling that this mission had changed something deep inside her. It was more than just a successful mission. It was about what she had learned, not only about the mission itself, but about the human soldier who had been at her side the entire time. Zarya sat quietly in her seat, her thoughts still spinning from the events that had just unfolded. Ethan had shown her courage she hadn't known humans were capable of, a calm under pressure that rivaled her own. His actions during the battle had been swift and precise, never faltering even when the odds were against them. Zarya had always seen herself as a strong leader, someone who could handle any situation. But for the first time, she felt like she had truly learned something. Ethan had taught her that strength wasn't just about power or control. It was about doing what needed to be done, even when it seemed impossible. As the ship glided through the stars, various thoughts turned to the way Ethan had protected her during the mission. She had seen him risk his life for her without hesitation. Without question, he had fought beside her, not as a human and an Ander, but as 2 people with a shared goal. The trust between them had grown in those moments of danger, and Zarya couldn't help but wonder if she had underestimated humanity all along. After a long period of silence, Ethan finally broke it. He looked over at Zarya, his expression soft, but serious. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice calm. "You've been quiet since we finished the mission." Zarya looked at him, surprised by the genuine concern in his voice. In all her years, she had never met someone who seemed so completely unguarded. Someone who cared so deeply about others, despite all the challenges they faced. "I'm fine," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "Just thinking," Ethan nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "It's been a lot. The mission, the danger, everything. But we made it through." Zarya met his eyes, her voice steady, but tinged with something deeper. "Yes, we did. And I couldn't have done it without you." Ethan's face softened at her words. There was a quiet strength in his smile, one that Zarya hadn't expected to see from a human. She had thought of humans as weak and unprepared. But here was a man who had shown her that bravery and loyalty didn't come from size or strength alone. It came from the heart. "You'd have made it without me," Ethan said. "You're stronger than you know, Zarya. You've got leadership in you, I've seen it. It just helped you get through the rough spots." Zarya shook her head slightly, her mind still struggling to understand everything that had happened. "I've always been taught that strength is something you can control, something you can measure. But you've shown me that it's more than that. You don't fight for power. You fight for what matters." Ethan's eyes softened, his voice gentle. That's the thing about humans. We don't always have the best tools or the strongest forces, but we've got heart. We fight for each other, for the ones we care about. That's where our strength comes from. Zarya thought about this, her mind processing the truth in his words. She had spent so many years trying to control everything, to make sure that no one could ever outshine her. But Ethan was different. He didn't need control. He didn't need to prove himself. He just acted with sincerity and loyalty, without any thought of personal gain. Zarya found herself wondering if she had been wrong to focus so much on power, on making herself untouchable. Perhaps true strength came from vulnerability, from letting others in and fighting for them, not just for yourself. She looked at Ethan, her expression softening. You're right. I've spent so much time trying to be the strongest, the most powerful. But now I see that real strength comes from something else. It's not about being perfect. It's about being willing to stand up for what you believe. Ethan smiled, the warmth in his eyes, making Zarya feel like maybe she was finally beginning to understand. Exactly. It's about what's inside, and you've got that, more than you know. Zarya sat back in her seat, letting his words sink in. She had always been proud of her strength, her power, but now she understood that there was more to it than just holding control. She had spent her life protecting her people, fighting for their safety and their place in the galaxy, but now she saw that the true value of strength came from standing by those you cared about. It was about fighting not just for yourself, but for others. Ethan had shown her that, as the ship continued its journey back, Zarya couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The mission had been dangerous, yes, but it had also been a turning point. She had learned something about herself, about humanity, and about what it meant to truly fight for something. For the first time, Zarya didn't feel the weight of her title as the Ander leader. She felt like a person who had learned from someone else, someone who had helped her see the world in a new light. Ethan turned to her, his voice steady. We make a pretty good team, don't we? Zarya smiled, a genuine smile that she hadn't allowed herself to show in years. Yes, we do. And for the first time, she truly believed it.